Hey everybody, I've got big news. I recently, just the other day, finished Cell. Now that in and of itself is not the big news, although I liked Cell way more than I thought I was going to. The big news is that Cell represents the last Stephen King fiction book that I had to read. It's a journey that I've been going on for 27 years. 27 years ago, when I was 12 years old, I started on my Stephen King journey by reading Carrie for the first time, and subsequently read it several more times. But over the ensuing 27 years, I made my way through 77 fiction novels, collections, short stories, novella collections written by Stephen King. And the only way that I can think of to celebrate that is to do just any number of ranking and rating and best of and worst of and top and bottom and in the middle, and Stephen King books that could have been Richard Bachman books and Bachman books that could have been Stephen King books, and just any type of list or thing or category I can come up with. I will do a video about it as sort of a reward to myself for reaching this milestone. It's been a long and interesting journey, but anyway, to kick things off, I'd like to start by doing a top 5 scariest Stephen King novels of all time. So here we go. So Stephen King, of course, is famously known as the king of horror, but anybody who has read a lot of Stephen King over the years knows that he has always been more than that. So when I was thinking about the top 5 scariest Stephen King novels, some of them were knocked out of the running altogether because maybe they have some really scary and intense set pieces, but overall they're not necessarily horror from start to finish. For instance, I'm a big fan of the novel Mr. Mercedes, but I would consider that to be more of a suspense novel. It has this brilliant set piece at the end involving a huge crowd of people at a concert, and that's nail-biting, and it's really exciting, but it's not, and it is scary, I suppose. It is scary, but it's more intense and suspenseful. And the book has lots of other feelings and themes and ideas that go along through it. So I took that one out of the running because I don't consider it scary, the scariest overall, even though it has some intense parts. Probably one of Stephen King's most famous novels, The Stand, I also took out of the running because while it has one of the scariest scenes that I've ever read, and that's of course the trip through the Lincoln Tunnel to leave Manhattan. Overall, the novel, it has some scary themes and some scary ideas, but it also has a lot of, I don't know, bureaucratic business as the main characters try to reestablish a government, and this is all completely subjective, but even The Stand does not enter into my top 5 scariest Stephen King novels of all time. But without further ado, here's the list. So right out of the gate, I'm gonna break my own rule. I'm gonna break my own idea for this video, and I'm gonna do a number 6, an honorable mention. And this one is scary to me, mostly for very personal reasons. It was the first Stephen King that I experienced by virtue of watching the movie, and it scared the hell out of me when I was about 7 years old, and I was haunted by it. I was disturbed by it for about 5 years. And then in 1995, in 7th grade, I decided to own my fear. I was going to take it back. And so I picked up the novel, and luckily it's a short novel, so it was really right up my alley when I was 12 years old, and I read it and I read it and I read it again, and at this point I don't even know how many times that I've read this book. And I'm talking about Carrie, Stephen King's first published novel. And the movie that scared me so badly was the 1976 film adaptation directed by Brian De Palma, starring Sissy Spacek. Even at the tender age of 7 years old, I was familiar with the concept of bullying, and I found the bullying aspects of the movie to be very disturbing. And then later, when I read the novel, of course, the bullying aspects are more fleshed out in the book than they are in the movie. And then there is no happy ending. So the kids are assholes, and they push things too far, as kids often do, and they do something terrible. And then Carrie, the sort of almost sympathetic figure of the novel, wreaks revenge that is just so beyond the pale, so over the top. And the book is grisly, and it's sort of mean, and it is scary. It's a little campy and it's a little corny, but it's legitimately scary. And I think if I had first read Carrie when I was a full-grown adult and I had never seen the movie when I was a kid, I might have thought, oh yeah, okay, well, there you go. And so I give it an honorable mention strictly for personal reasons. I do think that it's a brilliant story. I think that it's a scary story, and an all too plausible one, aside from the supernatural elements. But bullying is a real thing, and I think Stephen King was a teacher in high school when he was writing Carrie, and it very much comes across that he was close to that atmosphere, that environment, and I think the book is stronger because of that. He still writes young people very well, but over time he's gotten farther and farther. I mean, he's 75 years old now, so while he can still write a believable young person, nothing rings as true and as lived in as the young people in Carrie. And it's a fascinating book just by virtue of the way that it's put together. So within the book, there is a clear and linear narrative story. That's the original piece that Stephen King wrote, thinking that he might sell it to a men's magazine, which is where he had been selling some stories at that time in his career. And it little by little edged out of the territory of a story, sort of became a novella. Hard to market a book that was that length, a story that was that length, and so he fleshed it out with the all the fake background content, the excerpts from novels, the excerpts from nonfiction books, news reports, AP news tickers, things that give the book a real sense of reality that I think ultimately, even though it jacks with the narrative flow, actually makes it a stronger experience overall. But like I said, purely for personal reasons, I give Carrie an honorable mention, and it comes in at number 6. Okay, so coming in at number 5, I have Stephen King's second published novel, Salem's Lot. I first read Salem's Lot when I was 22 years old, and I could tell right away that it was in a different class. It was a world removed from Carrie. It's much bigger, it's much bolder. Stephen King was still very young, like early to mid-20s, mid to late 20s maybe when he was writing it, and it's really impressive how far ahead that he leaps from Carrie. in Salem's Lot. But I'm a sucker for haunted house stories. I'm not necessarily a sucker for vampire stories, but for some reason, Salem's Lot manages to make vampires seem scary and fresh and new again. And of course, anything to do with going inside the Marston house just is chilling. I read Salem's Lot in a very solitary space across a lot of cold evenings and nights in the winter of 2005, and I remember that sort of adding to the entire experience. Some scenes that stand out: the scene where they are delivering Barlow's coffin into the cellar of the Marston house. Oh man, it makes my skin crawl just thinking about it. And of course, the scene with the boy scratching at the window to be let in. And then it just builds a sense of menace really well. And a lot of Stephen King's earliest stuff, like really straight up, could be classified as horror. So there's a reason why these books often stand out as some of his scariest, because they were trying to be scary books, just through and through. But it really sucked me in, the entire atmosphere of the sense of menace and dread, almost like David Lynchian style, just lurking right under the seemingly normal, suburban, all-American veneer of the town of Salem's Lot. And then slowly the infestation spreads and the rot spreads, and the people that you thought you knew turn out to be the monsters next door. So I still have, I think highly of Salem's Lot. I have read it, probably 2 more times over the years. So I think I've read it a total of 3 times, and it's still one. It's kind of rare for me to reread a book, or if I try to reread it, to really get sucked in and just enjoy it all over again. But every time I picked up Salem's Lot, I still find it fresh, I still find it exciting, and I still find it enjoyable. So coming in at number 5, Stephen King's most scary books, Salem's Lot. Okay, coming in at number 4, probably not necessarily a surprising choice, but Stephen King's 1986 masterpiece, It, which I first read in 2017 when I knew that the movies were coming out. And I know it might be kind of a crap reason to finally read a Stephen King masterpiece, but I wanted to read it before I saw the movies, and it inspired me to dig in. I think I'd always found just the sheer mass, the length of it, to be very intimidating, but Stephen King has said that it was designed as sort of his final word on horror and on childhood and on everything that he had been about in his career up to that point. And it is absolutely massive, phenomenal, epic, but at the same time very intimate. I don't know if I've ever read a book that's so epic in scope and so broad, while still really just focusing on a set group of characters and digging into their lives and their friendships so intimately. I think part of what kind of I respect and admire The Stand, but part of what turns me off to The Stand is, or what sort of kept me at a distance, was because there's so many characters that I don't feel like any of them can be super fleshed out. One of the cool things about the uncut edition of The Stand is all the little like thumbnail sketches and vignettes that Stephen King puts in to build this world. That's actually one of the coolest things about that novel. But then when you read it, and you get to spend so much time with these characters, and they're brilliant characters, and in 2017 I was 34 years old, but it made me feel like I was a kid again. I wanted to be part of the Losers Club. I walked around for a while. I don't think I ever told anybody out loud, but I thought of myself as part of the Losers Club. And there's surprising moments of tenderness, but of course, just a nonstop parade of horrors, again, with the haunted house aspects. The haunted house in the novel is just terrifying, and Pennywise, the idea of Pennywise, I think is brilliant because he can appear as everybody's greatest fear. And while the first part of the novel was set in the 50s, the childhood storyline was set in the 50s, so some of the horrors would have been really specific and relevant to Stephen King and his generation. Some of them I didn't find as relevant. I never stopped kind of being freaked out by Pennywise. I mean, being a clown is kind of I don't know. I don't have a lot of sympathy for people who choose to make their living by being clowns, but I also can't help feeling a little sorry for professional clowns after 1986 when it was released, because I don't think people ever looked at clowns quite the same way again. There's a lot to admire in it. It just kind of keeps barreling along, and it remains interesting, at least to me. It built this world, and it was a world. Derry is a town full of terrible people doing terrible things, but at the heart, there's this core of love and compassion and friendship that really makes it special and gives it a moral center and a heart. And the way that it's constructed is absolutely brilliant. So of course, there's two plot lines when the group are children and when the group are adults, and they're set 27 years apart. And so one of the Achilles heels of the movies is that, not knowing if they would get to make a second one, they went all in on the childhood story, which is the more evocative story. So it was the right decision. They went all in on the childhood story, and they told the story from start to finish. And then the second movie has to go back and tell its story from start to finish, but it's very reminiscent and similar to the first story. But in the novel, the timelines flip-flop back and forth, so both stories unfold in a complementary way, sort of side by side, and it keeps all of the secrets until the end. So you don't read the childhood portion and then there's like an intermission in the middle of the book, and then the second book is basically, or the second half is basically the same story when they're all adults. It goes back and forth, and it sort of keeps you guessing. It keeps you on your toes, and reaches a very satisfying conclusion with both timelines pretty close together. So I just think it's a real masterpiece of story and concept and plotting and just structure. The way it's put together, there's a lot that I really, really admire about it. And I was, like I said, I was 34 years old, and it was still able to get under my skin, and it was still able to scare me. It's one heck of a scary book with a beating heart that keeps you coming back when you care about the characters, which in a lot of ways just makes it even more scary than it otherwise would be. So it coming in at number 4. All right, coming in at number 3 is one that I first read when I was a teenager. I first read it when I was 15 years old, and then I read it again. In 2021. So when I was a full-grown adult. So when I was 15, when I was 38, and it was fascinating how my perspective on things changed. But what was even more fascinating was that it scared the hell out of me both times. So coming in at number 3, Cujo. Stephen King's 1982 novel. So there's a lot of scary stuff. There's a lot of disturbing, scary domestic stuff that kind of went over my head when I was a teenager. What I remember about that reading was sort of being on pins and needles just about Cujo's descent into madness, the suspense that's built about you never know where he's going to be, and then of course the lengthy set piece where Donna and Tad are trapped in the car in the driveway of Joe Camber's garage, being terrorized by Cujo for days, and slowly withering away. That's the part that jumped out to me. And it's another book that's really interestingly structured, and that jumped out at me too when I was a teenager. There's no chapter breaks, and to me, you know, being young and a fairly young reader, I was used to the structure of books. And so Cujo, it's something kind of simple, but it kind of blew my mind that it just kind of barrels along and just slips from one storyline to another, and the tension just ratchets up, and it gets scarier and scarier. And when I was 15, I was closer in age to Tad, and I related more to Tad, which is kind of weird because, you know, I was a teenager. I was a big kid. I was a teenager, but I related more to the little boy. And I remember, so epic spoiler alert, but I'm sure if you're listening to this and you're watching this, then you're familiar with the story. But I remember not being particularly moved or upset. I was surprised when Tad dies, but I was not particularly, it didn't like rattle my world. But of course I remembered it because it was surprising. And then fast forward to 2021 and my reread, and now I'm a parent, and I've got a kid that's in 2021 was the same age as Tad in the novel. And it was rereading it, or more specifically listening to it, was one of the most visceral, upsetting, like foreboding, almost nauseating like experiences that I've ever had with a book. And suddenly I related to the novel in a completely different way. All of the marital discord subplot really jumped out at me in different ways, and even the relationship dynamics of the Cambers jumped out at me in a way that it didn't when I was a teenager and read it for the first time. And of course, just my parental instinct kicks in about, Tad just broke my heart over and over and over again. And it's like when I watched Titanic for the first time, I really got sucked into the story, and I really started to care for Rose and Jack, which of course sucks because you know in the back of your mind where it's going and what's going to happen. And there's and Stephen King he goes there, and he had young kids of his own when he was writing Cujo, and it's the one that he claims that he hardly even remembers writing because he was so wasted so much of the time while he was writing it. But one particularly upsetting thing that really lingers with me from my second go through is Tad's monster words, and it's words like a placebo that Vic writes on a piece of paper so that Tad can, and they recite it every night so Tad doesn't have to be scared of the monster in his closet, who of course is freaking real. There's a freaking literal monster in this little guy's closet. But write down the words. In my house, we put a dream catcher up on the wall above my son's bed so that, the dreams all the negative dreams get caught in the dream catcher, and you only have the good dreams, and it helps him not be as scared. But of course, it's just something that parents tell their kids to help them get to sleep at night. And Tad has the monster words in his pocket, and he keeps pulling them out because he believes in his father so much, and the magic of, you know, what that represents to a little kid. And he reads them over and over, and it's not enough. It's not enough. And that horror that you feel as a parent when all of the stories that you try to tell, all of the things that you try to do to keep your kids safe and to keep them happy, they aren't worth anything. And I knew it was going to happen, and it was my own damn fault for seeing it through. But when Tad died at the end of my second read through, I was just hollowed out inside, and was very, very dark and bleak and upsetting. And you know, Vic and Donna seemingly are able to pick up the pieces of their life, and they have sort of, I guess, a happy ending where they seem to have made peace and moved on. But I just kept asking myself, what would I do? You know, what in that particular situation, what could happen? Like, how could I possibly move on? And so it made the book very real to me and very visceral in a way that, you know, usually a scary story or a scary movie, you watch it or you read it and you're like, oh, this is really suspenseful and scary and and then it's over and you go back to your life. But the reread of Cujo was pretty brutal and painful, but you know, with the benefit of time, year and a half now probably has passed, then I have an even deeper respect for what Stephen King was able to accomplish, even apparently while so stoned and drunk the entire time that he doesn't even remember writing it now. It's still a powerful piece of work, and I respect the heck out of it. So coming in at number 3, Cujo. Coming in at number 2 is the book that is so scary it even scared Stephen King. It's the one that was so scary even Stephen King didn't think that he should publish it because it was just too dark and too bleak. And I'm talking, of course, about Pet Sematary. The novel was originally written, I think, in the late 70s. It was written a few years before it was published, and then it was put away because Stephen King determined that it was too disturbing to publish. And of course, once word got out about that, then paying constant readers, bat signals just started going crazy, and they had to have it. And of course, it was eventually released to sort of get Stephen King settled and resolved with his original contract with Doubleday, and it has since gone on to become a Stephen King classic. But this was one I read just recently. I read it for the first time in 2019, and again, I say read, but I actually listened to the audiobook version, and the narrator was brilliant. It was a very engaging performance. And so even though Stephen King is the king of horror, and he can write about some pretty bleak subjects, and he can go all the way, usually, even if it's ambiguous, there's some sort of rebalancing toward the end, and some sense of optimism and hope. What I really respect about Pet Sematary, and again, it involves a parent's like almost psychotic descent into madness because of love for their child. So it was, again, a kind of disturbing and hit close to home. Not quite as much as my reread of Cujo, but still, man, packs a punch. But what I admire about Pet Sematary is that it just slowly, like Dante's descent into hell, the different layers of hell. Pet Cemetery just goes deeper and deeper and gets darker and darker and darker and just spirals into madness. And I think that is one of the things that even Stephen King found so disturbing about the book, was that it is just kind of nihilistic. It's pessimistic. There's no sense of hope. Nothing is worth anything. And then there's some kind of subplot or something that I barely remember, except that it really freaked me out, about the Wendigo, I think. A monstrously huge creature walking around in the woods, towering over the trees. That scared the hell out of me. Even though I was a grown-ass man when I read it, that was pretty chilling. And but the novel just gets darker and darker and darker, and it literally has like one of the best, most perfect. Stephen King doesn't necessarily do his endings well. He's known for this, but Pet Sematary has one of the best Stephen King endings, and just really chilling. But anyway, Stephen King was right. It's pretty freaking dark and it's pretty freaking scary, but I'm glad that he published it. It's a good novel. It's not an easy novel. It's not one that you say like, hey, I just finished Pet Sematary, I really liked it, it was so cool. I mean, it seems kind of weird and sick to say that, but man, I respected the heck out of it, and I think I would consider it to be if not a modern horror classic, definitely a Stephen King classic. So coming in at number 2, Pet Sematary from 1983. Coming in at the top spot is another book that I have read exactly twice in my life. And it was, so after I read Carrie when I was 12, I really got into the short story collections because, I was still I was used to books of a certain length. And not only was Stephen King's content very adult, and his writing style was very unique to what I was used to, just the sheer length of his books was intimidating to me. So after Carrie, I spent some time with Night Shift and with Skeleton Crew, but the second Stephen King novel that I ever read, I read in 1996, which would have made me 13 years old-ish. And that was The Shining, coming in at my number 1 spot for the scariest Stephen King novel. I read it when I was all of 13 years old, and it scared the heck out of me then. And gosh, when was my reread? 2021, maybe 2022. So anyway, a year and a half ago, or less, within the last year and a half, I reread it, and it was still chilling and terrifying, but almost for different reasons. So one set piece, one infamous, legendary, brilliant set piece that scared me to death when I was a kid and scared me to death when I was an adult, is when Danny goes into the hotel room and meets the dead lady in the bathtub. That scene is so intense and so vivid, and I can remember, I'm 39 years old, and I can remember being 13 and reading that scene for the first time and almost not being able to breathe because I was so scared. And when I got to it again in my recent reread, I was again just scared. It's scary stuff, and it's brilliant, and I admire the heck out of it. But what was fascinating to me when I did my reread of The Shining was how much, again, my perspective had shifted when I was a teenager. So when I was 13, I was much closer in age to Danny. And even though as a teenager you start to develop more independence, you are still sort of, you are at the will of your parents. They have to take you places, they have to buy you things. You know, they're helping you try to grow up and become a good person. So when I was a kid and I read it, I related to Danny. What jumped out at me as being disturbing and kind of scary is this idea of having to go away from the life that you knew, that the friends that you had made, and go away to this new place and just spend all this time basically alone, or you know, at least with your family in this new isolated place. And Jack was more of just a boogeyman type of monster, and Wendy was, you know, Wendy was mom. She was trying her best to fight and to protect, and she was the protagonist of the piece. So that was my background and that was my perspective going into the reread. And one thing I was shocked and surprised by was how much I related to Jack. Again, like doing Cujo again for the second time, the worries and the subtext and the fears of the adults really resonated to me in a way that they had just gone over my head previously. I related to Jack's sense of obligation to his family, his sense of frustration, of, you know, his frustrated dreams that hadn't come to fruition, either by fate, luck, circumstance, or by his own actions and his own missteps. And this idea that he has one final shot to like really get his act together and put his life back on track. I identified with Jack, and Jack became more of a tragic figure, and I really felt his story arc deeply in a way that I didn't when I was a kid, and in a way that surprised me. And I understand that in his preparation for The Shining, Stephen King, though of course this would be classic, an amazing idea for a Stephen King novel. There's a group of people that are trapped in, I swear that this is what I read at some point. The original idea was that they're trapped in an amusement park, and how classic would that be for a Stephen King novel? But he kept wrestling with this question of, well, why don't they just leave? What's keeping them there? And then when he and his wife Tabitha went to the actual Stanley Hotel and were the only guests at the hotel, and he wandered around and he looked at everything, and you know, there's this big, mostly empty, ornate, elaborate, old-fashioned type of hotel, very spooky. The idea of the people being trapped in a place and then the hotel, and it all sort of came together and created the kernel of the story that became The Shining. But there's a real sense of, like a palpable sense of that isolation and that loneliness that creeps in as everybody except the three main characters, everybody leaves the hotel. And then, you know, so having seen the movie, the infamous, according to Stephen King, the infamous adaptation by Stanley Kubrick, a few times, I didn't really remember. I remembered the snow, I remembered the blizzards, I remembered the snowdrifts, and I didn't remember how much time there was in the novel before it starts snowing, when things are okay and there's still a chance that things will be okay. And the book really takes its time luxuriating in the beautiful scenery. It's almost heart-achingly beautiful to think of this hotel in the Colorado mountains, and the leaves changing colors, and the views and the vistas and all of that. And the book really makes you feel like, oh, it's almost like a picture postcard. And there's this undercurrent of dread, but I really feel like it could be okay. And then the snows start, and little by little, they no longer have the ability to leave. They're in the amusement park, so to speak, of like the original idea, And here's the reason why they don't just leave, because they're trapped, they're stranded, and they're snowed in. And that sense of isolation just weighs on you, and it's so scary. And then, of course, the Overlook Hotel is like the ultimate haunted house in all of the many haunted houses that Stephen King has written about, from the house in It to the Marston house in Salem's Lot. There are other examples, but the Overlook Hotel is at the top of the heap when it comes to Stephen King haunted houses. So the madness that creeps in, the isolation that the characters are feeling, and then just Jack's slow descent into madness, Danny's infamous run-in with Mrs. Massey, the lady in the bathtub, and man, it scared me to death when I was a kid, and it scared me really bad when I was an adult, and I admire the heck out of that. I related to it in completely different ways, but my reaction was the same. Holy crap, this is scary. So, of the 77 unique Stephen King books that I've read, that I now feel qualified to judge and rank and do all these different things with, because I've legitimately read them, at the top of the heap when it comes to the scariest Stephen King book of all time, I have to put The Shining. Well, there you have it. My top 5 scariest Stephen King novels of all time, and 1 honorary mention. So, what are your top 5? What's your top 5 scariest Stephen King novels of all time? I'd love to know what they are, and I'd love to know why you feel like that. So, put them in the comments. I'd love to read your thoughts and get to know your comments. Your perspective help me grow my understanding and my perspective on the books. So let me know what you think. And like I said at the very beginning of this video, this is the beginning of a whole series of videos about any number of ways that I can think of to rank and review Stephen King. At some point, I feel it inside, I'm building up to one of those videos that I have watched other people's and I always really enjoy, where you rank every single damn book in one video. And I have a tendency to talk and talk and talk and talk. So if I tried to do a video where I ranked all 77 Stephen King books, it would probably be about 35 hours long. So I gotta wrap my head around the best way to do that. I just hold it up and say, and at this number, here's the title. I'll do something like that. But I've got a bunch of ideas about rankings and ratings, and if you have a particular idea, something that you think would be cool, or something that you'd like to see, please leave it in the comments. I'm wide open to suggestions. But anyway, that's about it for me today for this video. So until next time, thank you very much for your support, and I hope you have a great rest of your day wherever you are. Talk to you later. Bye.